Welcome to another edition of Boilers Extra. I'm Nathan Baird from the Indy Star from Birmingham, Alabama.
Sam King from West Lafayette, Indiana. We're just
We're also
designating where we're
here.
at.
I thought for a while we were in matching hoodies because I'm matching Trey Kaufman Wren injury hoodies because you were, as usual, shrouded in darkness a few minutes ago, but you have figured out a better lighting situation. So hopefully it's a better viewing uh, experience for all of our many, many viewers out there.
It was the best $12 I've ever spent on Amazon.
Well, that's saying something too. Some news for Purdue basketball tonight. We're obviously going to get into the game. The reason I'm down here in Alabama, the game against the Crimson Tide on Thursday night. That should be, I think, it's a highly anticipated game. Should be a very good game. The last two have been for sure in this trilogy that they sort of stumbled into here. And we're going to talk a little football. We're just going to kind of a quick breakdown of what this Washington trip means for Purdue. I've just got some thoughts on that I wanted to share and bounce off of Sam. But let's talk the news of the day first. As of this afternoon, Purdue had signed a pretty good 2026 class, and Luke Ertl and a couple guys from the guys from up at La Lumiere. But we knew the fourth potential opportunity was sort of hanging out there, and it finally came a few minutes ago in the form of 7-1 center, and we believe it's pronounced something or approximately like Sinan Huan. We're not real sure on that first name. There's been much debate. I've been trying to ascertain for sure what it is. Regardless of how you say it, he's 7'1". He plays for Georgetown Preparatory in Maryland, and obviously a Chinese background from China. Played for Team China in the FIBA U19 World Cup this past summer, which is where he had some pretty impressive numbers. But Sam, this was as good as this class already was. They needed ultimate size. They had to add size from somewhere to this class. And there were a lot of names that guys who have come through in recent months, but this was the one that rose to the forefront for Purdue.
Yeah, and when you were looking at the makeup of what was coming in, what was going out, Purdue's losing 5 players, and as of this morning had signed 3. So you had to feel there was more room there. And obviously in this day and age, you always kind of leave that window open with the portal, but also the rosters can expand with how many scholarships you can give. Whether Purdue chooses to or not remains to be seen. Sounds like most likely not, based on what Matt Painter had said before. But back to the news, I think this is a massive get, and this is a guy whose recruitment kind of just blew up here since that World Cup a little bit. He visited Northwestern, he visited Ohio State, Illinois, and Purdue all since June, I believe, and whittled his list down to the Buckeyes, Illini, and Purdue. And to me, it just felt like Purdue was kind of the right fit there with its history of developing big men, and given that Oscar Clough is leaving, given that Trey Kaufman Wren is leaving, although he's not a 7-footer, he's 6'9" and plays in the post. So to package this with Daniel Jacobson in the future gives Purdue a pretty lethal combo in those two 7-foot-plus guys.
Yeah, and Liam Murphy also leaving, if you think of him just in that front court mix in general. And obviously, Raleigh Burgess is redshirting this year, so he'll be back. The other Sam King, the man who stole your identity, maybe around next year. We're still waiting to find out what the redshirt verdict is on him, unless there was an update today that I wasn't privy to because I was in the air. But so for people who haven't maybe heard kind of just his background a little bit, I want you to go into a little bit about how he got to the States, because I think that's kind of an interesting path. But at that FIBA event this past summer, he and Daniel Jacobson didn't go head to head, but Daniel Jacobson had a really strong showing there. He averaged, I think, 1.9 blocks per game. He was only playing about 12 minutes a game. Huan averaged about 25 minutes a game, and he averaged 5 blocks a game. He just dominated that thing from a rim protection standpoint. I think that was what really opened people's eyes. His game is evolving, I think, on offense. He's not really a back-to-the-basket type center. And with him and Jacobson both, this might be a different kind of post combination than Purdue's ever really had. It always feels like when they have even a couple of big guys, one of them has more of that conventional build and skill set. I don't know that either of these guys will qualify as that. He does have some perimeter game, some face-up game. That's going to keep growing. He's obviously got to get bigger too, just as a lot of guys his age of his height often do. But the defensive performance is what really jumps out at you. And as we've already been talking about as it relates to what Purdue did or didn't do last year and what Purdue can or can't do this year, Daniel Jacobson's rim protection is a big part of that. I think the idea of being able to maybe put 40 minutes of that level of rim protection on the court is, I think, very enticing.
Yeah, and just in the YouTube highlights, and I understand that those are clipped to only show the good a lot of times, but Juan seems to be pretty physical, attacking guys that are coming at the rim, and also when he gets the ball, he goes strong with it. Something you don't see it sometimes with guys of that height, especially as they're still developing and growing. But I like what you said there. The dynamic of having 40 minutes of a guy that just is basically the Great Wall when you get in the lane. That's a huge asset. And you're right. In the FIBA World Cup, I think he had 8 blocks against Canada and had at least 3 blocks in every game, and that's over 7 games. So
it's long.
Just dominated defensively in the paint for the duration of China's stay in that tournament. So that's a huge get there for what Purdue can be going forward. I'm sure people are going to talk about what Purdue's losing, but if you're coaching in college basketball, one group leaves every 4 years, or in today's age, even quicker than that, but you never stop adapting. And this gives you a much different dynamic than maybe what you've had in the past when you've had multiple 7-footers on the roster, like a Zach Edey and a Will Berg, or a Will Berg and Daniel Jacobson for the one game that they played together last year, or Isaac Haas and Matt Harms even.
I mean, this just follows the blueprint. This is a blueprint that's been in place since right around the time I first started covering Purdue, around 2013, 2014, that class where he brought in, PJ Thompson, Vince Edwards, Dakota Mathias, Isaac Haas. It was a nucleus of guys where you started to pair, guys who could handle the ball and guys who could shoot, and I kind of that ultimate offensive skill with ultimate height, and solve your rebounding issues. Make sure that you were highly, highly productive from an offensive efficiency standpoint, and then figure the defensive stuff out from there. And that has worked, I think, pretty well over these past 10 or 12 years. And this is just a continuation of that. You've got Luke Ertl, who's kind of I think a conventional combo guard. We'll see exactly where he fits in, but that's a role that I suppose could change over the course of his 4 years, depending on the other personnel there. They've got some other guys who would probably fit that definition as well. Then you've got Rivers Knight, who is really more of a power forward probably, and
kind of a stretch 4.
Yeah. But also, again, known, I think, primarily for what he can do as a perimeter shooter in a bigger body, that you would think if that fills out in time, where that could go. And then Jacob Weber.
8, so he's probably going to be similar to what Jack Benter is being forced to have to play this year, but he's bigger.
I think in a perfect world, it'll be a bigger version of Jack Benter. Yeah, I think that's exactly what you're looking at there. And then Jacob Weber, who is kind of along the Fletcher Lawyer lines, the Ryan Klein, the Dakota Mathias, like big time 3-point shooter from the wing. So you've got that just tried and true part of the blueprint was already locked in as of today. The last question remaining was whether or not Juan would come with it. What were you saying about the scholarship that he got that brought him to the States? Because I know that if you watched on Instagram, I don't think I've ever seen this before in a Purdue commit where the entire thing is in a different language. It was like subtitled in English. I was told that on his official visit last month, or September, I think it was now, his English is pretty good. They did have to have a translator there for his family, which is, because he's not he's not a native English speaker, and neither were the people who were with him. But yeah, he's here for he came here through a specific route, right?
Yeah. So what he received in 2020 was called the Joe Tsai Basketball Scholarship, and just reading up on it, kind of the synopsis I got was it is in place to provide Chinese youth with finances to come to America and get academic and athletic funding, basically, who have goals of, going to college and playing basketball, for example, or, probably even beyond that for some wanting to make it to the NBA. So that allows them to not have the financial burden. And then you can come to the United States, go to a boarding school, and he's at Georgetown Prep, I believe, in Maryland, where he's been for 4 years. And then, obviously that opens the doors for you to get to the college game.
I think this is a little bit of a unique thing too. I don't know that the Georgetown Preparatory has a huge reputation. I think they're trying to build one, and I think that Huan can be kind of something that maybe gets them more notoriety and gets the ball rolling a little bit. But it was down to Purdue, Illinois, and Ohio State, and obviously all solid programs to say the least. But I think the one that has the proven track record of taking guys like this and maximizing their talent is Purdue. And I think that, once if Purdue wants a big man in a class, the chances are pretty good that they're going to be able to land him, and they got him. So I do believe that they will probably add some sort of body. I mean, when you're losing Trey Kaufman-Renn, you're losing Liam Murphy. We'll see if Rivers Knight is someone who plays right away, or if they take a longer track with him. And then you've also got Jack Bender at the 4, but is that his best spot? Would he be better utilized as a 3? He can go back and forth between, I suppose, depending on what kind of lineups you want to put. Long-winded way of saying I think they will try to add a Trey Kaufman-Renn-like body. They're not going to be able to find another Trey Kaufman-Renn, but they'll probably try to add a true power forward type body, probably through the transfer portal. Probably something they'll look to do in the spring, just to kind of, as they did with Liam Murphy, round out the roster, maybe just like a 1-year thing to complete what they're going to need on the floor next year.
Yeah, and Matt Painter has had success even before the transfer portal was a real thing, getting the grad transfers that would come in for 1 year and just fill a need. Evan Boudreau, for example, would be one of those guys that, okay, we have the specific need. This guy he's done with his, previously done with his 4 years at whatever school, and he can come here as a grad transfer. So then, you think David Jenkins a few years ago, Lance Jones obviously comes in as a starter for a Final Four team. So
definitely like they've been doing it for a while. John Octius was maybe until Lance Jones had been like the biggest one in Purdue history.
Yeah. So, I mean, they will identify, especially once you find out what your roster is going to look like, because even Purdue, which has been hurt far less than a lot of teams through the transfer portal, you still lose guys every year because of just the world that college basketball is in right now.
Let's talk about the world of college basketball right now, specifically the game that's going to be played down here in Alabama. Well, not actually here. It's down the road a little bit in Tuscaloosa. I didn't go all the way down there tonight, but we'll be down there tomorrow. Coleman Coliseum, Purdue, number 1 team in the country still, and Alabama, the number 9 team in the country. They jumped up 7 spots, at least in the coaches poll, after an impressive win in New York City against St. John's. It wasn't at St. John's, it was at Madison Square Garden, but still a semi-neutral game, I guess you would probably call it. And I think it was like 103-96 or 98, something like that. Typically, kind of resembled a little bit some of the games that Purdue and Alabama have had here in the last couple of years, quite frankly.
Yeah, and that is Alabama style of basketball. And we saw it in Toronto 2 years ago. It was just a flat-out track meet. You couldn't stop either team, and it was going to be – and that game, Alabama went bananas from 3. I think hit something like 13 threes in the first half. It was crazy. And you're sitting there saying, if Purdue wins this game, it's just going to have to go on a blitzkrieg as well. You're not going to stop this team, and that's what ended up happening. You got a high-scoring game. Last year, it seemed like it was going to be that way, and then I thought Purdue did a much better job defensively later on in that game of slowing Alabama down and coming away with a win. So Purdue does have wins in each of the past 2 seasons at different sites. This will be the third location that they've played at in 3 years, which is kind of unique, maybe not as unique as I thought, thinking back to Marquette was, completed that trio last year with Hawaii and then each playing at their home arenas. But they're familiar with each other. And even though Alabama, some of the names have changed, the style hasn't, much like Purdue. Like, it does what it does, and it's established enough that, like, you just go find guys that do what you want them to do, and they fill gaps when guys depart. So I expect this to be another shootout type of a game, but Purdue's definitely going to have to be much better defensively than it has been the last two games.
You're not wrong that it was a good defensive performance in the second half against Alabama, I think. But at the same time, to me, it was sort of like running a PR with the wind at your back a little bit, because they had Mackey Arena on their side for the second half of that game. And especially once CJ Cox hit those 3 threes in 52 seconds or whatever it was. And now it's just like you're sitting next to a jet airplane taking off or whatever. And it's deafening in there. And if you're Purdue players, I think probably have a hard time communicating, let alone if you're not used to it, you're coming in on the road. That having that at their back definitely helped. And it definitely showed up other times in the season when they didn't have that at their back. Things would sometimes fall apart, whether that was Marquette, whether that was Penn State. Like, there were definitely some examples. So they're not going to have that at their – it's going to be a test of a different kind, because they're going to need to be just as good defensively as they were in that second half in a lot of ways, and they're going to have to do it on the road against a really strong team. And it's a team that, you were mentioning how many – I think they put up 40-some threes in that game you were talking about in Toronto. Well, they put up 35 the other night against St. John's, and they show no hesitation to just keep bombing away. At the same time, I think what really tests Purdue is how athletic this team still is, how much it can attack the basket. They've got to keep guys in front of them. They've got to prevent dribble penetration. Alabama still had a lot of points in the paint against St. John's, despite all the threes that they shot. Some of that was because they had, I think, like 14 offensive rebounds. But Brandon Philon Jr. was someone that I know that Matt Painter was asked about specifically today, about how talented he is. He came off the bench. I think it had like 18 maybe last year, or maybe even 20 something at Mackey. He had a really good game off the bench in Mackey last year as a really young player. Now you're starting to see his game round out even more. They had 4 guys score 17 or more against St. John's. Like, the numbers speak for themselves. Like, this is a team that I think first and foremost, when you look at each game, right? Like, I think a couple years ago in Toronto, obviously Zach Edey did what he did, but then Braden Smith also steps up and has a huge game. And you're like, oh, wait a second. Maybe this guy is like, it felt like sort of the arrival of him at a different way, right? Because then the next game, he and Fletcher Lure both had big games against Arizona, if I remember. And then last year, there was some question about how deep is Purdue? What are these young guys? How are they going to handle big games like this? And then CJ Cox answered it and did what he did. And I feel like this is a game where Purdue has some specific vulnerabilities, especially on the boards. And that's not really a vulnerability. I think they just need to do better than they have. And then defensively, and how do you step up and handle both of those things?
Yeah, and obviously the X factor here is that Trey Kaufman-Renn is expecting to play. That's what you didn't have in those first 2 games. That helps you on the boards somewhat. We'll see how much. But he's a guy that I thought, we were probably thinking he would play this game. I had requested him at media availability today, and when he came out of the locker room and walked over, I thought that was a good sign. And then he was asked what his expectation is for tomorrow, and he said, play. I'm going to play. And so he returned to practice yesterday, as we're recording this on Wednesday. So he returned to practice on Tuesday, practiced Wednesday, live practice, full practice. Seems like he's not probably 100% if you read between the lines a little bit, but he's definitely healthy enough to go. And I'd asked him, could he have played last week, or was that more precautionary? And he said, no, if I can play, I'm going to play. And I would rather have my first game of the year, my senior season, be at Mackey Arena than on the road. So that tells me he probably was beat up more than we thought. And he alluded to having a hip problem before he even got hurt during that practice. He said from an earlier game. So that would make me believe, like the UND game, maybe the Kentucky game, he got bumped a little bit, and then it just was kind of lingering until he got hit again.
So there was a moment in the Kentucky game where he got knocked down to the floor and came out of the game for a while and was sort of for people who are watching this. People who aren't watching this, you'll just have to imagine. But he was like kind of cranking his arm, I remember. And we thought that meant that it was like a shoulder thing. And I don't know that we even, probably some bad reporting here of all the people who were there. I don't know that anybody asked him about it after the game, exactly what had happened. But the way Matt Painter was describing it, they've been calling it a hip injury, but he was also talking about like rib cage. And that would make sense that you're just like trying to, like there's something in that general area that you're trying to work out or whatever. So obviously I believe him that if he could have played, he would have played. It does help that he did already have the game against Kentucky, especially in both exhibition games, to kind of, get going on the season. I do wonder what sort of toll it takes to then be out that long. He was doing non-contact stuff as of last week. And so you're still in the mix somewhat, but it does make me wonder exactly how much they can get out of him. And if that is something that alone could make the difference, right? Like if you have only I'm just throwing a number out into the wind right now, but like 75% of Trey Kaufman-Renn, does that make enough of a difference in a game on the road against a team as good as Alabama? It might. We'll see. It's the number one team in the country, and they're not going to be favored in Thursday's game from what I've seen. I think as of how we're speaking this right now, I think they're about a 3.5 point underdog. So, and that's on a neutral court or on somebody else's court, not a neutral court. So that tells you a little bit that they see these teams as pretty even, but the advantage would be with Alabama. But obviously the long-term concern here is just you can't have this thing linger. So it does make me wonder, do you come back, give everything you can at Alabama? They turn around again and play Sunday night and against, I believe, is it Akron? Is Akron Sunday night? Do you back off a little bit with him in that game? Like you've got other people who can play the 4 and who can get you through a game like that. I'm just speculating, but I wonder if there's some massaging of that has to be done, because next week you go to the Bahamas, long flight, not that long a flight, but a flight, and against a couple of whoever you play out there, it's going to be good. So it does make me wonder what we'll see from him on Sunday, but we're getting ahead of ourselves because we haven't even seen him play on Thursday.
Yeah. He said, his words were, it's just like riding a bike, and that's what you expect him to say. But I'm not so worried about any rust or anything like that, mostly because he's played 110 college games, and I'm sure that he's, probably played through some aches and pains over that time. So I guess the only issue is how hurt is he right now, going up in live competition for the first time. It's probably going to be a little bit more physical than Brandon Brantley beating on you with some, with some dummies or whatever in practice. But still good news for the Boilers that he's back, and he's not going to catch Alabama off guard. I assure you that, even if they probably scouted the last 2 games and he didn't play, but he scored 26 points against them last year. So it's not like he's going to be in the starting lineup and Alabama's going to go, hey, who's this guy? We don't know who this is. So you're not catching anybody by surprise by having him come back.
By the way, I know that there's that saying, it's just like getting back on a bike. I went a long period of my life. I'm older than people think I am. I went a long period of my life without getting on a bike. And then several years ago, I tried to ride a bike again. It is not just like getting back on a bike. It was like I'd never heard of the concept of a bicycle when I was trying to get back on it. So hopefully he now I don't have the athletic coordination of Trey Kaufman-Renn though. So hopefully it goes better for him. Any other ways that you think that this is how much do you look at this game as, especially because it's so early in the year? I think people sometimes, and we're guilty of it too, probably at times, of how this game turns out means Purdue is this, or it can't be this, or it's already doing this if it wins, and it has arrived in this way. And it really is more of just it's not the destination, it's just a way station on the way to your destination. And I'm trying to kind of prepare myself for that and maybe looking through it through the right lens, because I think last year that seemed like a big win, and that was a big moment to beat a team that good. But doing it on your home floor is so much different than doing it on the road. And it was also a night where Purdue shot 56% from 3. They only turned the ball over 3 times. There were some things that happened in that game from an offensive standpoint. Not that Purdue didn't control it and do good things to make it happen, but that are outside the norm, right? They're on the fringes of what your performance would be. They're outliers. And if you come into I think it also covered up some of the things that were already there as far as defense and rebounding and things like that. And I think that I'm watching every game so far this year through the lens of, okay, I know they either will or won't make shots, but like, what are they doing especially from rebounding and defense? Like, where does it seem like the trajectory is headed up on that, back to those levels that we've already talked about that every championship team for a while now has exhibited.
Right. And people probably forget now, but I think after that Alabama game, Purdue went to Milwaukee and looked like a completely different team at Marquette. So,
right.
And that was a game where the crowd really got behind the home team, and Purdue just kind of withered to the scene. And you're going to be in another hectic environment. Alabama's a program that's arrived. I felt like that was a program on the rise when they played in Toronto a couple of years ago, and then ended up being a Final Four team along with Purdue that season. And now Alabama's kind of maintained that status there in the top 10 to 20 teams in the country since then. So, but they play these games. Both of these teams are playing this game because they have eyes on March, and maybe it benefits Purdue this year that you're going on the road in a hectic environment, that you've already been at Kentucky. Although, you didn't really prep for Kentucky, you just kind of ran your vanilla stuff. But this game really does come down to, I think, in a lot of ways, shot making, because we talk about Purdue not being very good on the boards the last couple of games, not being great defensively. Making shots cures a lot of that, or at least appears to cure a lot of that. If you make shots, you don't have to get back in transition D. You can go back and set up your half court D, for example. You don't have to, fight as hard for the offensive rebounds if there's no offensive rebound to be had. But if Purdue can shoot the way that it's capable of and do it in a road environment, I kind of like Purdue's chances in this type of game.
I made my prediction. I picked Alabama by 1.
I
thought maybe if it's not 100% Trakoff and Wren, then that may be just enough to decide a game like this. I think this is a game where Purdue can play well and lose. You're on the road against one of the 10 best teams in the country, and a program that has like established itself as being now kind of annually one of the 10 best in the country. Like, there's no shame in losing this game. You can play well and lose this game.
I picked Purdue 88-81, and a lot of that really has to do with the chemistry that Trey Kaufman-Wren has with other guys who are going to be on the floor with him, and notably Braden Smith, who we've seen that that short roll, and it has not looked like we're used to it looking with Trey Kaufman-Wren last year, with what he did with Zach Edey in the past. And granted, they're more talented than the guys that he's throwing the ball to right now, but also there's just that continuity of having done it so many times that it's almost like you don't have to say it. They just kind of know what each other is thinking and pick teams apart in that regard. But you're right. A lot of it does depend on how healthy or how many minutes Trey Kaufman-Wren can play tomorrow.
Let's talk football. Neither of us is going to be in Seattle on Saturday. Purdue is playing at Washington, and I feel like one of the casualties of the transfer portal is that this game doesn't have the juice it might ordinarily have, that Purdue is going to play against the team that its just fired coach is now the defensive coordinator of. But there's only a handful of guys still on this roster who have any connection to Ryan Walters. I don't necessarily think there's bad blood between Ryan Walters and the players. It just didn't work out. He brought some of them here. He gave Devin Mockabee his scholarship and everything, although obviously Mockabee won't be playing in this game. But like, it feels like it should be more of like and of course the fact that Purdue's not winning, they have to get up for every game in a different way. It's not like one game. So I feel like this week should be a little bit more like fiery, and there should be a little bit more there. But it's just kind of like, yeah, it's Ryan Walters.
Yeah, it's been kind of like you're right. As far as the storyline, it's been kind of pushed to the back burner a little bit. And Purdue has absolutely mastered playing a team coming off a loss that people didn't think that team was going to lose. And that's what you get in Washington, which went to Wisconsin and got beat in the rain in a game where Wisconsin's leading passer was the punter. 13-10 loss at Wisconsin last week, now goes home and gets a Purdue team that's just desperate for any kind of moral victory, if not, an in-game victory. Purdue's really got a show up here. I mean, we've talked about this game was one Purdue win. This game's one Purdue could win. This is a game that I don't think Purdue can't win. It's a game that Purdue's 15.5-point dogs, I think, in. So nobody's given Purdue a chance. But I do think that if Purdue continues to do some of the things well and can do that consistently over 4 quarters, it's not unheard of that Purdue could win this game. But that said, I don't think it's going to happen.
Yeah, I'm skeptical of it happening too, just because it's hard to expect the offense to execute consistently enough, even when they move the ball, to finish off the drives. And defensively, the one thing I will say is they have oftentimes this year, last year, one of the catastrophes was that there were so many like 3 and outs. It just felt like the offense was going nowhere and the pressure was always on this defense. And this year, even if the offense isn't scoring as much as it wants to and finishing drives as much and has had its stall out moments, there's been more complimentary football. Not enough by any means, but it's been more complimentary. And I think that has helped the defense at times be able to stay in some games longer. You saw some evidence of that even against Ohio State last week, a game where they weren't scoring at all, but the defense kind of like stuck in there for at least a while and made Ohio State work for its points. I'm going to predict, I'm going to say like Washington 30-17. So still a relatively comfortable win for Washington. But I also think the fact that you've got, I don't know what effect it's going to be going on the road. Last year, a Purdue team went to Oregon State, did not look especially good in doing so, obviously. Different cast of characters from coaching staff and players, I understand. But I think it just exemplified that sometimes making those trips, it takes you out of your routine. It's a long trip. How does it change things? We'll see. But I think it's another game where we could come out of it thinking, hey, Purdue looked pretty good against one of the – Washington's not ranked anymore, and they did just have this loss. I think that definitely works against Purdue, by the way. Like, you don't want to play the team that just got woken up. And I feel like that – you're right. That seems like it does happen a lot to Purdue.
Yeah, most notably Notre Dame last year, where
yes,
I think we were all fooled into thinking, well, if Northern Illinois can beat Notre Dame, why can't Purdue in Ross-Ade? And then it was just I've tried to forget about that game. But this is a game where, and I'd asked earlier this week with the defensive coordinator and with Barry Odom, and then with one of the defensive players, Damon Williams Jr. is a dual threat quarterback. Purdue's had some success defending dual threat quarterbacks, but this is a different kind of dual threat quarterback. He's really good on the run, throwing and running with the ball. And I think he's top 5 in yards per game passing in the Big Ten. He's the leading rusher in terms of quarterbacks in the Big Ten. He is legitimately a dual threat quarterback, and that's even taking into account losing 186 yards in sacks. So really dynamic player. Now, he was slowed down last week, obviously, but they have the running backs to complement him, and they've got a really good receiver. I just don't see Purdue being able to completely shut that team down, though I think Purdue can have some success. I kind of was in the same line as you in terms of point differential. I had like a 23-14 Washington victory, but I think this is a game where, again, Purdue will compete and people can say, hey, look, this is an improving team, but ultimately, wins and losses are what you're gauged on, and I don't think Purdue's going to come away victorious.
Yeah, it's, they did against Michigan, like that was legitimately a threat. Like if they were able to get a stop there at the end of the game and get the ball back, like who knows what happens. They just weren't able to get off the field at the end, but Michigan was threatened in that game. Like that upset, kind of what Wisconsin just did to Washington last week. That was on the table. Purdue just couldn't quite get there on the road and finish it off. Ohio State, it was more just like, okay, you looked better than people thought you would against a kind of juggernaut sort of team. Washington is not a juggernaut team. I think they're pretty solid, but they just showed last week, and again, they're the ones making the long trip for that, but like there are some vulnerabilities there. So I think this is a game that is potentially, I mean, they've been progressing. What we really haven't seen yet is if Purdue in one of these games just like finishes off one more drive and then avoids a turnover, like avoids a mistake and takes advantage of one. Like it can flip. Like they could be still in this game in the fourth quarter. Could it be something like last year when that team went to Michigan State? And it's not a great example because that Purdue team was worse and that Michigan State team was not as good as this Washington team is, but still, like, they just had the vibe there that was one they could pull off, even though they couldn't quite do it. Could I see them approximately doing something like that? Yeah, maybe. I wanted to ask you one more thing before we depart, and that is, should Purdue, and I've been trying to ask this question of the coaches the last couple of weeks, should Purdue just play Malachi Singleton more outside of the Malachi Singleton package? I've, at times, if people follow us on Twitter, been kind of like, why are they doing that with some of the Malachi Singleton package stuff? It worked in a big way a couple of times. It's also gone nowhere a couple of times. But there's been enough production, and he leads that touchdown drive against, admittedly, Ohio State's second string. But having covered Ohio State and just having watched football, you can tell that Ohio State's second string is better than the first string of some teams in this conference, including, I don't know, Rutgers. Like, leads a touchdown drive. Like, should they just put him in for a conventional drive and see what happens, especially if it's a week where the offense keeps stagnating the way it was last week? I think they averaged 4 yards a pass attempt with Ryan Brown in there. Like, just pick, say, hey, the first possession of the second quarter, that's going to be Malachi's possession. I don't think that interrupts the flow of the game any more than sending him in quickly on goal line situations and stuff. Like, I think it's just at this juncture of the season, if there really wasn't that much separation between them, why wouldn't you want that longer look at him just being a quarterback as opposed to being a package quarterback?
Yeah, and I kind of voiced my displeasure when it didn't work last week. I don't care how many times the coaches defend this decision to have him come in when you're driving down the field and run a play that goes nowhere. It's the wrong decision. In that moment, you felt like Purdue really had some momentum going, and then you take it away by putting a different quarterback in to run the ball. I'm going to credit here Jared Jezelaitis, who does the Hammer Down radio show in Lafayette, because he brought this to my attention today. He said Ryan Walters doesn't know a lot about a lot of these guys on Purdue's roster anymore, but he does know a lot about Ryan Brown. He coached him the last 2 years. He knows what he can and can't do. And, Ryan Brown probably is a little bit improved from the product that Ryan Walters had, but I think if you're going to do it, this is a good week to do that. Here's somebody who you haven't seen a whole lot of. When you have seen him, it's been in mop-up duty, or it's been in this hippo package where he comes in and he's running the ball and just trying to pick up a couple yards and move the chains. Or, in the case at Minnesota, the floodgates open and he got a 40-yard touchdown. But show something at this point in the season. You have nothing to lose. Show something that they haven't seen a whole lot of, that they're not prepared for, and see what you have in this guy, because you are ultimately going to have to make a decision moving forward on what your future looks like. And while both of these guys can come back, I think Purdue desperately also needs to upgrade its quarterback situation. But you need to know, what these guys can do and see it in real time with Malachi Singleton in a game where it's not out of reach.
By the way, this isn't also me trying to throw Ryan Walters under the bus, or Ryan Brown under the bus. Ryan Walters kind of threw himself under the bus. Ryan Brown under the bus. I've been the one also throughout the season who's been pointing out, hey, he's not getting a lot of help from his receivers a lot of the time. There's been miscommunications. There's been drops. There's been, other issues at times. And yes, he's made some mistakes too. I don't think that was a good throw last week that resulted in the interception. But to me, it's more about, you have a responsibility, and it's tricky because yes, they have nothing to lose, except they don't want to lose a game they can win. They don't want to mess around from what they think is the best formula to win the game, which they think is Ryan Brown starting. It's why he's a starter and has started all year. So they don't want to mess around with that if it means it decreases the chances of them winning the game, I think, even a little bit. Although, again, they are very open to putting Malachi Singleton in for short yardage situations and little gimmicky things all the time. So, again, to me, I think you also have a larger responsibility to what this team is next year. And I would just also, for the fact that if Malachi Singleton is here next year and Ryan Brown are both here next year, or you just need Malachi Singleton to come in and play as they did at Northwestern, I would just want to get him more experience playing real quarterback reps against defenses that are better than yours that you see in practice, for sure.
Yeah, and he didn't look great against Northwestern, obviously, but he was down 13-0 when he came in. It's the second half, and at that point, Northwestern was pinning its ears back a little bit and going after the quarterback at times. And you had a guy who hadn't had those kind of reps consistently throughout the course of the season, and he really didn't have many reps when he was at Arkansas. He had really one drive that people remember against Tennessee, but he's a guy that I thought when they ran this package, the idea was always like they would catch somebody sleeping and he would hit a deep ball because you just assume he's going to run. And then at Michigan, they tried that. It was an overthrow that may or may not have worked. Can't tell now because it was an incompletion. But you want to see him just run the offense. You want to see him go out there and feel like the coaches have the confidence in him to go down and lead a drive in a game that is still very much up in the air or that can shift momentum. And then who knows, maybe he gives you a spark in a moment. But I don't know if the coaches are going to lean that way. It doesn't sound like it in the way you're asking the question and getting the responses. We usually get told Ryan Brown is our starting quarterback is kind of the generic response we continue to get.
Yes, and they're also not going to be they're a little as they should be cagey about strategic things, right? And I almost don't expect them to tell me, yeah, actually, now that you mention it, we're going to bring him in. Like, they're not going to do that, right? It's more, sometimes you ask questions because you're trying to catch the vibe. You're trying to catch the reaction and how they talk about things. And I did think that this past week, Barry Odom talking about how, Malachi has been doing more. They have been using him in more situations that he did look, did come in and do a good job. So my antenna is up a little bit that maybe they would try something like this. The other thing my antenna is up for is if they bring him in another, like they did at Michigan, where it's midfield, they're bringing him in a short yard situation on third down or earlier or whatever, but you get to a third down and 4 down territory and it's 3rd and 2. If they don't throw the ball there, I don't know what I'm going to do. Like, it's just as someone who watches football, it feels like they are just running into a brick wall there because they don't throw the ball on 3rd down when you're going to go for it on 4th down anyway. Why not use the element of surprise to your advantage there? I feel like they just haven't, unless I'm forgetting, I don't know if they've done that at all with the Singleton package. I know they've thrown it a little bit in the goal line when they've been able to gimmick things up and get somebody wide open in the end zone. But like, I don't know. This is one of those things that I'm looking for. I'm ready for that to happen if the game is in the balance and they have a chance to do something and they have him in at that situation. This might be the week that they've been waiting for to have him throw the ball there instead of run it, especially because the last couple times the runs have looked they've kind of gone nowhere.
Yeah, and the one at Michigan, it sounds like, having talked to Josh Henson over a week ago now, he said that was schemed up right, everything was right, and Malachi Singleton ran the wrong way. So even when you do everything right, it kind of still went wrong in that regard. But he has to be respected as a guy who's going to throw the ball for this to work more consistently than it has. And if teams just know he's going to run the ball, you're never going to get anywhere in this package. And if you go out there and let him lead a meaningful drive and he does well, it's kind of late in the season now, but at least you've shown that, and you put that on film for Washington in the second half, for example, or against Indiana.
That's it for another edition of Boilers Extra. We will be talking to you next week, similar time, midweek. It probably will be late Wednesday again, just because I'll be flying down got muted there somehow. Flying down to the Bahamas next Wednesday. But we'll be talking about the Alabama game kind of in context of leading into that trip down to the Baha Mar Invitational. And we'll be talking about, I think our football discussion next week probably needs to be very forward-looking. We'll preview the bucket game, the week of the bucket game. But Barry Odom now a few times in the past couple of weeks, really just the past couple week, has sort of preemptively brought up the idea of how important player retention is. Right. And I think it's going to be that next week would be a good week to really delve into what we think in terms of player retention and where Purdue needs to hit the board.
And Purdue did just make a hire this week that I think is supposed to help in that regard.
Correct. Yes. They hired the guy who had been UCLA's GM. And I'm not exactly – I know that it's not somebody that's above Brandon Lee. Brandon Lee, the general manager at Purdue, still is, I think, at the top of that list under Barry Odom, but this guy also will now fit into that somewhere. And it's all about, like, you've got to evaluate quickly. You don't know for sure in a lot of cases already as of November, whatever, who's actually going to be waiting for you there in a couple weeks. So you've got to be ready to strike. You've got to be ready to evaluate. And you've got to, most importantly, I think, have self-evaluated and know who you're probably going to have and where you need the most help. You should know that by now. And really the answer for Purdue is they can still upgrade basically everywhere. So we'll get into that more next week. I'm Nathan. He's Sam. Thanks for joining us.